Welcome to the 2026 Gubernatorial interview series. I'm Michael Burris, the CEO of the South Carolina Policy Council. Today we are joined by Mr. Rom Reddy, candidate for governor for the state of South Carolina. So we're going to get right into it. And the first question I have for you today, sir, is why are you running for governor of the state of South Carolina?
Actually, it's a question my wife asked me too. Not an easy question to answer. I think the short answer is I feel like we have weaponized government against the citizen. And I would have preferred to have backed someone who I felt could reverse this weaponization. And when it came down to, I'm up against 5 candidates or all politicians who have been in office for a combined 53 years. I said, they're not going to do it. If you go back a few years, Michael, 250 actually, to the principles of the Declaration, the second paragraph of the Declaration says, we're endowed by a Creator with certain unalienable rights. And basically, to me, it says, our rights come from God. The very next sentence says, government derives its power from the consent of the governed. So government's job is to protect those rights. What's happened, and it started a long time ago, so it's not something unique. It started in the Woodrow Wilson era, I think is the 28th president, and it has become worse and worse. In South Carolina, government has taken that power, and through a vast agency state, 100 plus agencies, and a judiciary that's far from independent, we have weaponized that against the citizen. So now government really believes, many branches of government and the courts like the family court and the probate court, they believe their role is to go after the citizen as opposed to protect the citizen's rights. And I said, as a citizen myself, I've never run for office. We got to do something about it. We're not going to kick this to the next generation.
Well, thank you for that, sir. And, I think that for a lot of folks out there, your candidacy has been somewhat of, a last-minute entrance into the race. Why now is the question that I think a lot of people in South Carolina have.
Yeah. And I, like I said earlier, I never wanted to run. As you know, we formed Doge SC, and as Doge SC, as the founder of Doge SC, we developed a whole array of tools, Michael. Tools like forensic audits that I can do in a fraction of the time. We have also regulatory audits. We developed a portal system for citizens to communicate. We introduced the judicial reform bill, and almost unheard of, we got all 85 Republicans in the House to vote for it. So we did a lot of work, and then this judicial bill went to the Senate. 27 out of 32 senators supported it. One guy holds it up, the chair of the Judiciary Committee. Not a good guy, Luke Rankin. And that type of power in one individual, I think, is what our founders would describe as tyranny. And this thing can be changed by a simple Senate rule. And the simple Senate rule would be, seniority cannot be the criteria for being chair of a committee. The committee chairs should be elected and serve a term of 2 years. And I finally said, I can't change this from the outside. I spent a bunch of money as Doge SC, and I've gotten it so far, I can't get it over the finish line. And so that's when we decided, you know what? No one else is going to run from outside. There was some rumor at one point that some of the outside guys, like Warren, I think, John Warren, one of those guys might run. And when I realized that no one was going to run, I said, we can't put this off for another 8 years. We'll destroy the state.
Well, thank you for that, sir. I think that's gives people, I know they've heard it a lot from you, but it just sort of gives people your perspective on why now is the time. We're going to move into some policy questions, being that we are the South Carolina Policy Council, is kind of our thing, right? So we're going to move into
And you guys
taxes and
and you
spending.
guys do a good job, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
We
I,
try.
I, I read I read some of your stuff, and it's all very intuitive and good.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. I will relay that to my staff. They are hard at work in the rooms down the hall on the next set of bills now that we're only a week and a half outside of finishing session. So taxes and spending, I know you care deeply about this issue. This first question kind of paints South Carolina broad strokes over the past several years. South Carolina has increased general fund spending, except for one COVID-induced pause, every year for the past 25 years. How would you address the ever-rising spending by state government?
So yes, what you said is right. But for your listeners to really understand it, I think it's easy to put it in a more concise form. Over the last 10 years, state spending in the general fund has doubled, literally doubled in a Republican administration. And then guess what? Local spending, and a lot of listeners don't know this, but local spending is what drives your property taxes. Property taxes are out of control. It's like a life sentence, out of control. Local spending has doubled in the last 10 years. Um, as recently as 2019, $19 billion of local spending, $30 billion this year. So the first thing we've got to do, Michael, is we've got to restructure and reboot government. We cannot keep government where it is. You know, I see some people saying, well, I'm going to freeze it. I'm going to cut it by 3%. It's not going to work. South Carolina's government in its current form cannot be fixed. We got to understand that. Your listeners need to understand it. Cannot be fixed by chipping at a rock with a toothbrush. You're going to polish the rock. I think it needs to be torn down and rebooted. And so we've laid out a systematic plan to do that. And unless you do that, everything you're talking about is not going to work. So we have a plan that takes the 100 plus agencies to 35. We have 17 public safety agencies. We're going down to 2. Same with health, same with administration, same with education. So when we do that, a lot of these agencies, we're going to have to take about 30,000 jobs and redirect them to the private sector, where we actually make these jobs available in the private sector and take them off the public payroll. These boards and commissions have to be torn down. I don't know if your listeners might be interested in this. Our spending on higher education went from $700 million in 2015, $1.8 billion. Who are we educating? Oh, I know. We're paying administrators. A massive growth in the administrative state is where the money is going to. But of course, we need some type of a commission. Don't you think we need a commission to oversee this higher education? Yes, we do. So we have a commission on which we spend $100 million a year. This whole thing is broken, Michael. I always say this. People try to make this election as something it's not. They say it's black versus white, man versus woman, conservative versus Republican, conservative versus liberal. It's not anything like that. It is citizen against a broken system. That's what I do. This is my wheelhouse. My whole life, I've restructured businesses. We built businesses. We fixed businesses, and we get results. That's what needs to be done here, because if you look at the results, all the spending, all these taxes that's been going on. Education 10 years ago, bottom 10. Today, bottom 10. Roads 10 years ago, bottom 5. Today, bottom 5. Median family income, bottom 10. Today, bottom 8. Violent crime 15 years ago, top 10. Today, top 10. Nothing has changed for the citizen. Nothing. So these people get this dark money. They go in there, they wake up in the morning and they say, let's see, which donor or special interest can I take care of? Like they did last year. They took all these agencies, they said something about efficiency. Instead, what do? They had more office buildings moved out of buildings they own into leased buildings, $500 million over 20 years lease. From who? The biggest donor to the Republican Party. So simple. So simple. Once you understand how this all works, then you understand why it's broken. for the first time in a generation, in your generation, my generation, and your listeners' generation, you have someone running who is not taking a dime of money from anyone. No one. So I think for the first time in a generation, we have an opportunity to say, I'm obligated to no one but the citizen. And the question is, are we going to do it or not? Or are we going to keep doing? You know, Senator Kennedy, a great guy from Louisiana, he said, keep doing what you've always done, and you'll keep getting what you always got. And that's what we're doing, Michael.
Thank you, sir. If elected as the state's next governor, you're going to have some immediate powers under the current system that we have. Part of that is constructing the executive budget and also the power of the line item veto. So nearly every year, as the budget process ramps up, we're currently in the throes of it right now, the governor's initial proposal is typically the smallest, with spending growing in the House and Senate drafts that follow and often wind up in conference committee. How would you use the line item veto and the powers of the governor's office to ensure the final budget more closely reflects your initial proposal?
Well, first of all, let's back up from the budget. The budget is a symptom. We got to back up to the governance and what's going on with the setup of the governor's office. The governor has no cabinet. Congratulations. Have you ever run a business where you don't have a staff meeting? You have nothing, just stuff just keeps happening. Maybe you go play golf or something. I don't know. Your companies don't last very long. The governor has no cabinet. We've got to set up a cabinet. Now, these reduced agencies that I talked about, the 35 agencies, every one of those agencies has to have a line reporting into someone in the cabinet, or just if not, you can't run the state. Right now, there is no way to run the state the way it's set up. No cabinet, no reporting into the cabinet by anyone. The governor is completely uninvolved from everything, and we are violating you and I think talked about in the past. You probably read the Federalist Papers. If you go back and read the Federalist Papers, that explains what Madison wrote to explain the Constitution to the state of New York so New York would ratify the Constitution. The entire system is based on three co-equal branches, so each branch holds the other in check. The executive branch is supposed to hold the legislative branch in check, supposed to hold all these agencies in check. And it specifically says in there, they have to prevent encroachment from the other branch. It says it in there. That's the heart of our system. That's why you have a free people. We have to reassert the executive powers of the governor. He has the powers in Article 4 of the South Carolina Constitution that says he's the supreme executive authority. He won't use it. And you mentioned the veto, which is a very, very good point. The president doesn't have a line item veto. The governor has a line item veto. This is a supermajority state, and he can't sustain a veto. To sustain a veto, you need 1/3 of the House or 1/3 of the Senate. And you can't sustain 1/3 of the House or 1/3 of the Senate in a supermajority state. That's not a broken system. That's a lack of leadership. You have no idea how to lead. So I'd say get rid of the pocket kerchief, get rid of the scissors that cuts the ribbons, and get to work. Get to work. Go into the districts of these people. By the way, I will be in Luke Rankin's district telling his people, their people, what the heck Luke Rankin is all about, an ex-Democrat who should not be in there. You know, you have to behave like you are in charge of the executive branch and act like it. You can't sit back and say, oh, the governor has no power, so there's nothing I can do. I'm sitting on the back end of some budget that I put out there that no one even cares about. You think the legislature cares about whatever budget he submitted? I don't even think they'll look at it. They don't care about his budget because he's not involved. I asked a senator who had been there for 5 years. I said, how many times have you met with the governor? Once in 5 years. Can't govern like that, Michael. We have a leadership crisis. And as a result of that leadership crisis, we have a violation of the Constitution's 3 co-equal branches. If we don't fix that, we can't fix all the little things that you're talking about. We've got to win that battle first.
So to expound on that, because this is an interesting talking point that's been, floated a bunch. We just saw in the transportation bill that the House passed last week that the Secretary of Transportation, again, assuming this makes it through the Senate, will now be accountable directly to the governor. I believe the board, the commission, is going by the wayside, the way of the dodo. So that's objectively sort of a step in the right direction. We, of course, support that endeavor here. The Policy Council have written about it. How would you gain in a legislatively controlled state as the governor? What are maybe some tactics that you would use to move the legislature, who, under our current form, would have to make the decision to let the governor have more cabinet officials, and we can go down the list of what those agencies are. But how would you negotiate and sort of frame that to the legislators who ultimately are going to make that decision through legislation?
As you know, when we passed the thing I talked about, the judicial reform bill, I got all 85 legislators, all 85 Republicans support it. So that all said, I think, Michael, this is a constitutional issue. There cannot and should not be encroachment of the legislatures onto the executive branch. One of the things I've said, radical as it might sound, but actually President Trump is doing it at the federal level. Reasserting executive power might mean, in the South Carolina, it will mean that we are simply going to walk in and say, you're fired. And they're going to say, you can't do that. We were appointed by the legislature. I said, I just did that. You are fired because you're in my branch, and my job is to prevent encroachment from the other branch. Let's go to court. Let's go to court, and let's have a constitutional challenge in court. And we will have, as part of a transition team, the best set of lawyers we can to fight this type of encroachment. And by the way, those lawyers need to be from out of state, because the in-state lawyers are another corrupt cabal, by the way. So if you don't know that, you're going to find out. And so these people have to be challenged. And it's the carrot and the stick. I know I can work with the legislature. I did with judicial reform and equal parenting, but I think there needs to be something that says, when I take an oath to uphold the Constitution, I mean it.
Thank you, sir. We're going to switch topics now into government efficiency and transparency, which I know we've touched on in some of your other answers. Currently, South Carolina has the Office of the State Auditor, Legislative Audit Council, Office of the Inspector General, and the House Government Efficiency and Legislative Oversight Committee, which is a mouthful. 4 distinct entities aimed at government accountability. How would a Department of Governmental Efficiency differ from these entities? And again, going back to your previous organization, obviously the name Doge was incorporated in that. How, given what I just told you about all these 4 different entities, I think I know where this is going, but in your words, how would Doging occur in South Carolina under your leadership?
Well, we can start with eliminating those 4 agencies. We're going to need all these agencies. This is, Michael, you can fix incompetence. You can fix laziness in many ways. You can't fix stupid. I'm sorry, but you can't. All you can do is eliminate stupid. And so I think we can start by eliminating these agencies. This cabinet is going to have to govern. We are in charge of this executive branch. We are going to govern. And when you talk about how we go about eliminating things, the biggest thing we can do right now is technology. I've used technology. I used technology in my last company that we sold in 2023 extensively. And we have developed tools, like you said, as part of Doge SC, that allows us to do simple things. I can go into an agency. I actually did in the case of regulations, but I can also go to an agency in a matter of days, simply say, when I say forensics audit, a lot of people don't know what I mean, so I'll clarify it. It'll simply say, where is the cash coming from and where is the cash going to? That's all I care. I don't really care if you put a debit or a credit or what you did with it. I want to know, where is the cash coming from and where's the cash going to? I can do it very quickly and very easily. And let me tell you something else we need to do. We need to do the same thing with the local municipalities and the local school districts, which are out of control. We have more administrators than teachers now, as you probably know. And so we're going to go into these local municipalities and we'll say, we're going to subject it to a forensics audit. The first thing they're going to say is home rule. Home rule, you can't do that. We're going to say, great, rule your home, because we're going to cut off state funding tomorrow. If you want state funding, you will be subject to a forensics audit. Why? Because I have a fiduciary responsibility to my taxpayer. They are my shareholders. I have to explain to them where the heck this money is going. And the same thing for, there's no accountability. You know, all these institutions, Clemson and all this stuff, we're going to call them in and simply say, in one page, explain to me why I should be investing this money in you. So government has two roles. One is non-discretionary. There are some non-discretionary expenses we have, whatever they may be, jails, roads, those kind of things. The other is discretionary. Over 50% of what we spend is discretionary, what government spends. So we're simply on the discretionary period, we're simply going to say there needs to be a return. If there's not a return, I want to give it back to the taxpayer, because they can at least put it in the money market fund and get 4%. I don't want to be spending all this money. Why should I spend all this money? So, Michael, the best way I can say is this state has not had a CEO. We mix up these things. You know, being in the policy council, you've been in business, you've got a lot of business friends. What do we do in business? What do I do when I buy a company? We look at people and we say, your skill set is in staff, right? You can be a good accountant, you can be a good this, you can be a good that. Your skill set may be in management. You can be a supervisor or a manager. And then for a handful of people, you are a leader. Your skill set is leadership, and we develop those paths. Here we don't. We take these congressional people, what do? They don't have the skill set to govern. They file bills. You know, I saw Mace the other day, he said, I filed 65 bills, the second highest. How many of those bills become law? 0. And you know, in governing, if I have 65 at-bats, I'm going to get 50 hits, or I'll sink the company. So that's the difference. Your listeners need to know this is a different skill set. As long as we keep putting people who write bills and talk about messaging and do this type of stuff, and suddenly give them the keys and say, now go govern, they don't know how to govern. You know, governing is, you know, it's a developmental thing. You develop people and you program their brain on how to govern and get results. You just don't, suddenly you're not a genius because you got 1,000 votes and you got elected to some Congress or something like that. So this is a problem. We've got to realize it's a problem and match up the skill sets. And I'll tell you one of the skill sets we need to match up. I saw these people who say, I'm a business guy because, you know, I think Norm and I, real estate development, from 25 years ago. That's like having a satellite phone. Those skills are obsolete. I mean, I know that when I was running my last company, skills from 2015 were obsolete. And we had to send these people back to remedial school, back to developmental programs, so they got up to speed on modern day management skills. You know, some of these things these people talk about, freeze something, cut something across the board by 3%. That's 1970s. So your listeners need to know, governing is something you're not necessarily born with. Some handful of people maybe, Elon maybe, but most people are not born with it. You learn it, and you learn how to get results. And you don't learn it just because you can file bills and be in Congress. And we keep making this mistake over and over and over again. That's why nothing changes in South Carolina.
Thank you, sir. You know, my wife and I had this discussion the other day. She's an attorney. I went to business school, and she said, "What do you think the best graduate program is to, you know, get into government?" And I said, "Well, business school, clearly." And she argued law school. So we're currently having a little debate about that. But anyway, just as an aside, off of your comments.
Well, I'll tell you something. I think having met Brooke a couple of times, I think Brooke can do anything. So she's different.
I would agree.
She's multi-skilled. You know, you could probably make her governor, and she'll probably govern fine.
That's why I call her my better 3/4 instead of my better half. But
yeah.
Well, moving into another topic that we love to talk about here at the Policy Council Earmarks. So last year, in a welcomed change, there were no earmarks. The governor and, of course, Senator Peeler came out and said we're not going to do earmarks this year. They are back this year. We hear a lot about earmarks. There's a lot of stuff that goes on that seems very wasteful. In fact, it probably is. But also there are some earmarks for rural and more, financially tried counties or regions of the state that do make some modicum of sense. Where do you stand on earmarks, and if elected governor, how would you run through that process?
Well, look, this is whatever, a gnat on an elephant's ass, right? These earmarks, yes, there's a whole bunch of crap in there, but they're like 400 to 500 million dollars out of a 42 billion dollar budget, right? Even if you take out the federal piece, you're talking about a 30 some billion-dollar budget. So these are all nice talking points. They're all like, okay, let's talk about the earmarks. I'm going to cut out all the earmarks. Okay, congratulations, you saved 3 or 400 million dollars. So, I mean, most of it is BS. We shouldn't be doing these type of things, but there's so many bigger things we're doing that we shouldn't be doing that it's all a question of where are your priorities here, right? The other thing is there is a check and balance on earmarks, which is the governor. He can just say, nope, not going to do that and cut it out. But he can't uphold it, apparently. He can't uphold a veto. We have some ability to manage these little things without a whole lot of drama and talking about it. But we've got big things to do. We are wasting money. You're talking about earmarks being 300, 400 million. Do you know they have a state board of technical and comprehensive education? An oversight board. State Board of Technical and Comprehensive. Looks like a nice name. Maybe the longer the name, they make sure that people, they say evil resides in complexity. So you make it long and complicated, and people are like, I don't even know what that means. Well, it doesn't mean much. It's an oversight board. $260 million a year. What the heck are we doing that for? This is what I mean. So they talk about earmarks and all this thing, some little gnat on an elephant's ass to cover up the real issues. We've got big, big issues when you talk about billions of dollars that we can put back in taxpayers' pockets.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We're now going to move on to a topic that you've mentioned with OJC having some experience with, and that's in the legal realm. So last session, the legislature passed a proposal on lawsuit reform, also known as tort reform, related to liquor liability. We have heard as of last week that bill is fallen flat and is actually causing businesses to pay more in terms of compliance with it. Senator Massey has issued set up a proviso basically to try to remedy this, at least for the next year, under the budget, but it is, again, not a law that is going to be passed. What is your position on reforming South Carolina's joint and several liability law, sort of writ large across all industries that obviously affects the hospitality industry, which in Charleston is one of the major economic drivers, as well as in other parts of the state, and from joint and several liabilities towards a more pure liability where the at-fault party is the one who is ultimately held liable? Thoughts on that, sir?
Okay, so I'm going to start at a higher level and come down because so your listeners can really understand it. Any type of insurance of any kind, and it doesn't matter if it's this, doesn't matter if it's health insurance, doesn't matter if it's auto insurance. There is a direct correlation between claims and premiums. As your claims go up, your premiums go up. So let's just start at the very top and say, so strategically, as opposed to tactical conversations, what should we do? We should make sure that our claims are not out of control. How do you do that? There's 2 or 3 major things. One is the one you mentioned, which is proportionate liability. If I am responsible, let's say your home burns down, right? And I accidentally happen to leave some little piece of cloth that may have contributed to it. So maybe I'm 10% of the problem. In South Carolina, I might be sued for 100% of that home burning down. So now what happens? My premium goes up to cover that. So clearly that has to be eliminated. It has to be proportionate liability. but it goes beyond that. To keep the claims down, we've got to stop this contingency fees being unlimited. The states do it different ways. Some of them are tiered, right? They say, okay, you get 40% or whatever the first million, then you get 30% of next, and then it caps out at 10%. For us, it's just can be anything. So the lawyers, the trial lawyers, who are 32% of the legislature, even though they're 1% of the working population, they have incentive to run up the number, because the more they run up the claims, they get 50% of it. So we've got clearly we've got to remove that incentive. So just think about it this way: anything with insurance, we've got to keep these claims under control. So you have an accident or something like that, they will bill them the medical bills billed instead of the medical bills paid. Why? To run up the claim, which then in turn runs up our premiums. So the whole thing has to be reformed. I mean, it's not just literally reforming one piece. Proportionate liability is one piece. But we've got to reform it with the strategic goal of saying, if we don't bring the claims down, our insurance will continue to be out of control. So I think it has to be reformed. It is the reason you're having so much trouble with it is, like I said, 32% of these guys benefit from it. They're and how do we have that many trial lawyers? Ties into another deep story. Dark money in South Carolina. 40 out of 50 in disclosure of dark money, which means that, the Supreme Court ruled that, 501c4s and, these political advocacy groups can donate to political campaigns unlimited amounts, some restriction of 501c4, none on political advocacy groups, because it's free speech. But they left the disclosure up to the states. South Carolina has no disclosure. So when you go vote for someone, you have no idea who bought and paid for them, because you can't tell who are the source donors to their PAC. 2 PACs came into the governor's race yesterday. No one has any idea who one of the PACs was till they actually run an ad, and then you don't even know who paid for it. Still no one knows who paid for it. So this is the corruption, this is the politics. Until we get these core issues fixed, you're facing this. But any of these insurance issues, do not forget, always go for the result. The result is we got to bring claims down. If you don't bring claims down, you'll never bring premiums down.
Thank you, sir. Another area under regulatory reform, we have a big bill this week, just got passed by the House. Last week's in the Senate now. It's DOT reform. We mentioned it earlier about some of the changes that the House had put in that we see as accretive to the effort, although the bill still has a little ways to go. So spending on roads in South Carolina has continued to increase, but residents say they still haven't seen the results of the higher spending. How would you implement policy changes at DOT, and that could either be within the bill that's currently going on or addition to, in the road repair process to ensure residents see improvement in the quality of their infrastructure? And just as an aside, obviously we're doing a story right now on pothole claims and pothole repairs through the NERV, our investigative journalism arm. And the amount of claims that are getting, trying to be billed back to the state for people, especially people of low means who get their axle shattered or, bend a tire out and then don't really have the means to fix it. Those are material impacts that are happening on a daily basis in the state that are affecting real people. So just to kind of put that cherry on top, given our latest piece at the NERV, what would your attack be on this?
Yes, so let's check, Rose. You're 100% correct. I think we used to spend $1.3 billion, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, and now we're $3-some billion on roads. They said, give us more money. We did. Nothing happened. It's not that people think the roads are bad. I think it's the Bureau of Transportation Statistics that the percent of acceptable roads went down even though our spending more than doubled. And so these are independent people are saying that. And you have to say why. Well, one, you address, this independent commission, 8 people being picked by the legislature, the transportation commissioner being picked by that all needs to be gone. The only change I'd make to whatever happened there with this bill is, as governor, I want to appoint the transportation secretary. I ran a construction company in 50 states. I know a little thing about construction. And I know who needs to be in that job. It's not a financial person. It's not an analyst. It's not some guy running around. It's someone who knows how to run construction. And if you don't have that, it's a very complicated business. So that said, 2/3 of these roads, 41,000 miles, are managed centrally. I think we're fourth or fifth in the nation. That's the Russian Gulag system of management. Cannot be done this way. It has to be gone. I know this bill talked about this, and they fight forever about funding and who's going to fund it. We have a plan to do that, but that has to be cut in half now. Now, we can't have this thing. King Street in downtown Charleston is a state-owned road. What the heck is that? And so that has to happen. The third thing that needs to happen is we really have to get out of in-house maintenance. If I did in-house maintenance in my company, I'd be bankrupt in 2 months. We got to get rid of all these trucks. We got to get rid of all these people that are doing in-house maintenance. In-house, there's a way to do this. I've done it. It's easy to do. Contractors are easy to do it, and you just have oversight, and all the risk is removed because you can hold them to performance standards. That will also allow us to cut the bloat. As you know, Florida has got 25 million people, and their Florida DOT is give or take 5,000 people. We have 5 million people, and our DOT, give or take, is 4,000 people. Something's out of control here, and all this bloat needs to go. I actually looked at, when we were doing this regulatory audit with our AI program at DOJ-SC, and we found 37.1% of the regulations in DOT have no connection to the law. I actually looked at some of these contracts. I have to tell you, whoever is doing contracts in SC DOT is either incompetent or drunk or both. Let's pick both for now because they're so bad. They don't understand risk. They take on all the risk for overruns. They take on all the risk for delays. These contracts are not even contract. I've never seen a contract like that. I would never be on the other side of a contract. The whole contract process is broken. And then you've got the very famous DEI, a total disaster. Please read the SC DOT code. We had our AI actually read and pull it out. You can't even theoretically hire a non-minority without getting some type of approval. The contracts, all these contracts they have women and minority-owned requirements that are hard to fulfill. Contractors can't fulfill them. That's why you don't even have good contractors participating in the process. The whole system is broken. It cannot be run like this. And the legislature, get the hell out of the way is what I say to them. Leave it to me. I know how to fix these. It should be the responsibility of the governor to take the execution of these and get them done. And that stuff you're talking about, they had a 23-member commission come up with it. 23 members? Really? 23 members commission coming up with suggestions. If they came to my desk, I'd have out my dead on arrival stamp and stamp it and throw it in the trash. We have to run this like a business. And only then, and I tell you, these roads, I've looked at them, can be fixed very quickly. Within 2 years, you will see people will notice a dramatic improvement. This is not an issue of money. It's not an issue of anything but competence and leadership.
Thank you, sir. Our last section today speaks to something that you've brought up earlier in our conversation that I know just from observing you care deeply about, and that is the education of the children of the state of South Carolina. My first question here is, what role should parents have in shaping their child's education, and how would you protect that role?
Yeah, but look, parents should have an incredible role in shaping their child's education. I think there's almost, my foundation has been working on education for, 20 years now. And if there's one correlation we see anywhere in the world, really, is that when you have more parental involvement, you have better educational outcomes for the kids. When you have less parental involvement, you have worse educational outcomes for the kids. So that's a no-brainer. I think what's happening here very fundamentally, there's a whole lot of issues with education. The kids coming out of kindergarten, Michael, they're not bad. The skill set is not way off the mark. we're losing them between kindergarten and fourth grade. Between kindergarten and fourth grade, we're losing the kids. By the time they get to fourth grade, 68% of them cannot read at grade level. And I can tell you, we've done this work in other parts of the world. If you don't catch them and you actually let them get in there in fourth grade with 68%, it is very difficult to catch them later on. It is just like, I don't know, pushing molasses uphill. It is very difficult to do. We have to fix that right away. That cannot happen. As a matter of fact, the foundation we have is running a pilot at the Edgefield School District in the Aiken area, using some math and English reading software that identifies the deficit in these kids early on and helps fill that, and to your previous point, with parental involvement. So the parents can actually use these tools to help their kids. And I believe, and some people may not agree with me, listeners may not, that if a child does not pass cannot read it, pass a third grade reading test, they should repeat third grade. I don't think we should push them to fourth grade with that type of reading. That said, there's many other things that have to be done with education, starting with the governance. The governance is totally broken. We have an education oversight board that needs to be dismantled and be made part of the education department. The oversight should be the responsibility of the education secretary. We've got a state educational board that, of course, is constitutional, but should be appointed by the governor. The education secretary should be clearly very involved in leading that state education board, and the governor needs to be involved in education. He can't be sitting on the side doing his little motorcade. He has to be involved in what's going on in education. Then you got 81 school districts with preeminence. Never heard of that. For the listeners that don't know it, preeminence means they don't have to follow a state requirement on policy. The state can say, hey, I think this is great for helping reading in second grade, and Charleston School District can say, I don't think so. Really? And what the heck are we doing with these administrators in schools? Out of control. There is a bunch of different things that we can do in education, but we have to have an overall goal. And the overall goal has to be, we got to get education to the top 20 in four years. We have to be able to move a needle. We have to have a goal. We were spending $11 billion in education in 2019, K to 12. We're spending 17 some billion this year. And guess what, Michael? We're sitting there right there, 42, 43 out of 50. We're not moving the needle. So the things we're doing are not moving the needle. And this is what happens when you have people who don't know how to govern. They're not focused on a result. We have to be focused on getting results. And we'll get it done. Well, we're not going to allow our kids to suffer like this. Our kids, it's a disgrace to our children, honestly.
Thank you, sir. So my next education question is, would you support expanding school choice options for families? That's a big discussion right now in Columbia, broadening out whether it's charter schools, school choice writ large, based on the performance of schools in an individual's district, including charter schools' education savings accounts or tax credit scholarships with the aim of having the funding directly follow the child.
Yeah, so look, of course, I'm all for saying that parents should have a choice and should not be forced to send their kids to some failing school and condemn them to, I say education is freedom, is economic freedom. When your child is condemned to 42 out of 50, that's educational tyranny, not freedom. So yes, I totally agree with that, but I'm not sure I agree with this narrow approach that the state takes. They've spent, I don't know how many years and how much of time with this one school choice option that maybe is now, I don't know, 10,000 kids. They say maybe 15,000 out of 800,000. That doesn't move the needle for me. So I go back to the result. The result is I got to move from 42 to 20. So if I'm moving 10,000 kids after 3 years of work, that ain't moving it from 42 to 20. So I need something bigger. And so I would like to say, why don't we start with universal public school choice? What is that? Why is that not the case here? Why can't I just say I have an effective school grading system like Florida has that's very transparent? I can see a school is graded C largely based on how the student is performing. I don't like how, we have a grading system here, but I don't like it. It doesn't reflect how the child is learning. Too many other factors in there. So I need to be able to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to send my child somewhere else. And then the state needs to be able to intervene and say, if your school is rated a D, I'm going to intervene. I'm not going to just sit there and let you be a D. We got some idiotic intervention standard. 65% in the district have to fail for 3 years before you can intervene. What about all the kids who get through there for 3 years whose lives you've destroyed? This thing is broken. It can't be run like this. It has to be run with results. And the only thing I say on the other point you mentioned on the money following the child, I don't have a problem with the concept. My only thing would be if it's public money and it's leaving the system, right? If it's public money and it's leaving the system, there needs to be some accountability for it. You can't have public money just saying, oh, I'm following the child, I'm going off somewhere and I have no idea whether that money is being used to get a positive result for the child. There has to be some way of saying, yes, that public money is going and the child's getting a really good education and is meeting certain standards. So there's some accountability there, because I do believe that, going back to the previous comment I made, that we have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholder. We are reaching into the shareholder's pocket and taking their money. We need to be able to say we have a responsibility to know how that money is being spent.
Thank you, sir. That's all the questions I have today. I'm going to turn it over to you for one last thought. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to convey to our listeners before we wrap up?
No, I think the only thing I'd say, the only thing we did not talk about is I do think we need to protect our children. We're top 25% in crimes against children. So we actually have a policy proposal that says, listen, for first-degree criminal sexual conduct, which is a child 11 years or less, it's supposed to be 25 years in prison. No one does that. In a couple of years, they're out and they're redoing it. 12% success rate with this system we have. So we actually have a proposal that I will get done in the first year, modifying that statute to say, you know what, I'm a nice guy, Michael. So you didn't give that child a choice, but I'm going to give you a choice. You're going to do your full 25 years, but a mandatory condition of parole, if you want to be released earlier, is physical castration. I do not believe these people can be cured. I've been working on this for 20 years. I know Brooke's been working on it. She'll probably confirm what I'm saying. These people are thugs. They cannot be cured. And if they cannot be cured, they are going to stay in prison. And if they want to get out early, then we cannot endanger our children with a 12% success rate. These people will say a mandatory condition of parole is physical castration. Germany does it. Czech Republic does it. Denmark does it with 95% plus success rates for our children. I take that any day over 12% success rates. And finally, I'll say to your listeners, this is a once-in-a-generational opportunity for you to say, instead of a politician, I'm going to have a CEO as governor. Instead of being donors and special interests paying your way in there, and then you got to pay them back. And some of them we don't even know, all of them we don't even know who they are. In my case, I have no donors. I have no special interests. I wake up in the morning and all I can say is, how am I going to get results? Because we got to get out of this thing we're in. We can't be in this bottom. We're a beautiful state. We deserve better.
Well, thank you, sir, and thank all of you for watching at home. Again, this is Mr. Rom Reddy, candidate for governor on the Republican ticket for the 2026 gubernatorial election. The primary, again, is June 9th. I believe early voting starts the 26th of May. Thank you, Mr. Reddy, for your time. I wish you a great day, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.